Trade tariffs cast a shadow over the technology sector. Former President Trump declared a potential 25% tariff on May 23, 2025. This would target Apple and other major smartphone manufacturers. They must relocate manufacturing to the United States. This announcement sent ripples through the industry. It signaled a return to Trump's protectionist trade policies. Reports indicated Apple CEO Tim Cook declined an invitation to a Middle East trip. Trump expressed displeasure despite Apple's investments in the US. He criticized Apple's strategy to manufacture iPhones in India. The implications would be far-reaching for Apple and American consumers. In the face of direct criticisms and the threat of tariffs, Apple CEO Tim Cook has adopted a restrained public posture. Cook has chosen not to issue a direct public rebuttal to Mr. Trump's statements. This strategic silence is seen as a deliberate tactic. It allows Apple to focus on its operations and avoid public confrontation. Apple is no stranger to the complexities of international trade disputes and the threat of tariffs. The company has a well-documented history of actively engaging with policymakers in Washington, D.C. to protect its interests. In previous years, particularly during Trump's first term, Apple significantly increased its lobbying expenditure. These efforts were aimed at persuading lawmakers and administration officials to oppose tariffs that could negatively impact its products and, by extension, American consumers. One notable instance of Apple's successful lobbying involved a potential 145% tariff on Chinese-assembled iPhones. Tim Cook personally engaged with then-President Trump, making a case for an exemption. The arguments likely centered on the potential for consumer price hikes, the disruption to Apple's intricate supply chain, and the company's significant economic contributions to the US. Ultimately, Apple managed to secure an exemption, demonstrating the effectiveness of its direct engagement and strategic communication. Beyond direct lobbying, Apple has consistently highlighted its substantial investments in the United States. This past success provides a crucial historical context for the current situation. Manufacturing iPhones entirely in the US presents significant challenges for Apple. Experts highlight the immense difficulties involved. Apple's supply chain, developed in Asia, is complex and vast. Replicating this domestically requires huge investment and time. The US lacks the skilled labor needed. US-made iPhones could cost 3 times more. Prices could reach $3,500, driven by higher labor costs and new facilities. The imposition of a 25% tariff on Apple products, as threatened by former President Trump, would inevitably trigger significant economic consequences, felt by both the company and its vast consumer base. For Apple, the immediate impact would be a substantial increase in its cost of goods sold for products destined for the United States market. Tim Cook himself mentioned in May 2025 that Apple could face up to $900 million in tariffs in the current quarter alone, even under existing tariff structures. A blanket 25% tariff on its flagship products would dwarf this figure considerably, directly affecting Apple's profit margins. This increased cost burden would likely compel Apple to make difficult choices. The company could choose to absorb the additional costs, thereby reducing its profitability. Alternatively, and more probably, Apple would pass on at least a portion of these costs to consumers in the form of higher retail prices. Higher prices for popular consumer electronics like the iPhone could contribute to broader inflationary pressures within the United States economy. The recent tariff pronouncements and the preceding events suggest a notable cooling in the relationship between Apple CEO Tim Cook and former President Donald Trump. During Trump's presidency, Cook was often seen as one of the few tech executives who managed to cultivate a relatively constructive, or at least pragmatic, working relationship with the White House. There were several instances of direct dialogue, including dinners and private meetings, where Cook articulated Apple's position on trade, manufacturing and immigration, sometimes achieving favorable outcomes or exemptions for Apple. This earlier dynamic appears to have soured. The New York Times reported that Cook's decision to decline an invitation to join Trump on a trip to the Middle East visibly irritated the former president. This incident, followed swiftly by the tariff threat specifically naming Apple, signals a departure from their previous interactions. The public praise for Nvidia's CEO, who did attend the trip, further highlighted Trump's displeasure with Apple's perceived lack of cooperation or alignment with his agenda. This shift underscores the often personal nature of high-stakes political and business dealings. The current situation, marked by public criticism from Trump and strategic silence from Cook, suggests that this established playbook may be less effective or perhaps intentionally set aside for now. A significant element of Apple's long-term strategy, and one that has drawn Mr. Trump's recent criticism, is the company's concerted effort to diversify its manufacturing supply chain beyond China. India has emerged as a key focus in this diversification plan. Tim Cook recently announced that a growing proportion of iPhones sold in the United States would in fact be manufactured in India. This move is driven by several factors, including geopolitical considerations, the desire to de-risk its supply chain from over-reliance on a single country, and the potential to tap into India's burgeoning domestic market. The expansion of manufacturing operations in India is a complex and resource-intensive undertaking. It involves significant investment in facilities, logistics, and the training of a skilled workforce. Apple works closely with its primary assembly partners, such as Foxconn and Pegatron, to establish and scale up production lines in new geographies, while India offers a large labor pool and government incentives. Replicating the efficiency and scale of Apple's Chinese operations presents considerable challenges. Nevertheless, the strategic imperative to build resilience into its supply chain appears to outweigh these hurdles. While Apple is the most prominent target in Mr. Trump's recent tariff pronouncements, the implications of such a policy would extend far beyond a single company, affecting the broader technology landscape and international trade relations. The threat of a 25% tariff on all smartphone makers selling devices in the United States, unless they manufacture domestically, would create significant upheaval for numerous global brands. Companies like Samsung, Google with its Pixel phones, and various Chinese manufacturers such as Xiaomi or OnePlus would all face similar pressures and difficult decisions regarding their US market strategies. The challenge of relocating complex manufacturing operations to the United States is not unique to Apple. Most major electronics companies rely on sophisticated, globally distributed supply chains, predominantly centered in Asia. These ecosystems have been built over decades, benefiting from specialized labor, established infrastructure, and networks of component suppliers. Forcing a rapid shift to US-based manufacturing would impose enormous costs and logistical nightmares across the industry. This could lead to a reduction in product variety, stifle innovation due to increased R&D and production costs, and ultimately harm consumer choice. The delicate balance of global commerce, already under strain from various geopolitical factors, could be further destabilized, creating uncertainty for businesses and investors worldwide. Apple, under Tim Cook's leadership, has demonstrated a remarkable capacity for navigating complex and often turbulent political and economic environments. The current tariff threat from former President Trump, while significant, is another challenge that Apple will likely address with a combination of strategic patience, behind-the-scenes diplomacy, and a continued focus on its long-term operational goals. The company's history suggests it will not be easily swayed from its core strategies by political rhetoric alone, though it will undoubtedly take such threats seriously in its contingency planning. The outcome of this specific tariff threat remains pending as of early June 2025. However, historical precedent, such as the 2025 scenario where similar proposed tariffs were ultimately not implemented, offers some indication of potential pathways. Apple's substantial investments in the United States and its role as a major employer and economic contributor also provide it with considerable leverage in policy discussions. Tim Cook's strategic handling of the situation, characterized by public silence and a focus on operational execution, appears designed to avoid inflaming the situation further while allowing for quieter, more direct channels of communication if and when they become appropriate. This approach reflects an understanding that public confrontations can be counterproductive.